What separates a good anime from a great anime? Why do some animes stick with us long after we've watched it? Welcome to The Workshop.
I'm Emily.
And I'm Kris.
We're two friends from high school and now aspiring writers. And in this podcast, we discuss and deconstruct storytelling elements in some of our favorite animes. Are we ready for this?
I'm ready.
Today in The Workshop, we are going plus ultra as we break down one of the most beloved Shonen Jump series of the 2010s, My Hero Academia. Set in a superpowered society and jam-packed with heart, action, and lovable characters, My Hero Acca was adapted for the screen and aired in July of 2014 by Bones Animation Studio. Since then, it's received an overwhelmingly positive response from both critics and viewers all over the world.
So, My Hero Academia takes place in a fictional world where the majority of the human population is born with some kind of superhuman ability, referred to as a quirk. Our main character is a boy named Midoriya Izuku, also referred to by his nickname Deku, who dreams of becoming a superhero, but unfortunately is born without a quirk. By a stroke of luck, he crosses paths with All Might, his favorite superhero, who bestows Deku with a quirk, which allows him to enroll in UA, the most prestigious superhero high school in Japan. Season 3 starts during the summer break after Deku's first semester at UA, as he and his classmates continue their hero training. However, their training gets cut short by the impending threat of a powerful organized crime group with mysterious motivations called the League of Villains. That was a long summary. I apologize. I felt like it was all necessary. So
it was all necessary.
Yeah. But
we haven't done this in a while, but please heed this major spoiler warning. We will be spoiling pretty much the whole show.
Yeah, seasons 1 to 3
I think
especially.
Everything is free reign, right?
Yeah. My overall impressions are not too spoilery, so you can stick around for that if you want. But once we talk about the writing and you don't want to get spoiled if for some reason you haven't watched the show, then maybe you can jump out. All right, so we're gonna talk about
here we go.
Overall impressions before we get into the nitty gritty. I will start today. Okay, first of all, guys,
what?
I have never been so nervous to record an episode before. Last night, I was preparing for this episode as if I was about to write an exam. Like, I felt like I was, like, rehearsing what I was going to say.
I've never been so thorough with looking over my notes. I was like, don't mess up, don't mess up, don't mess up.
Yeah. Okay, so obviously this is a very popular show, right? And I think it's safe to say that by now, this is up there, I think, with, like, the defining anime of this decade. It just has such a big fan base, and I think with all popular pieces of media, people have a lot of opinions about it, and people might call it overrated, but I think it's undeniable that the show does a lot very well, especially in the way that it situates itself amongst other shonen battle anime, which I will get into. Sure. But first, I want to talk about why we chose to cover season 3, because I know you're gonna say it's because I'm a simp. And I just wanted to talk about a specific character. And you're not wrong, but I do want to justify myself because season 3 specifically is the emotional climax, right? And like the thematic payoff of a lot of character plot threads that have been building in the first 2 seasons. So I felt like there would be a lot of value in analyzing this anime from the perspective of this season, because I think that there's a lot that this show does really well in its character writing and in how it builds up its emotional stakes across multiple episodes. And by doing that, it makes the emotional payoffs feel very earned. So I just love season 3. I think it's the show that made me fall in love with the show back when it first aired. Because before that, I was like a casual fan. But then now, I'm not. It's elevated.
We were talking about which season to cover. And I was like, oh, like season 4, because it's the most recent, like the most relevant. And Kris was like, I just think that season 3 is like so, you know, there's just so much going on. I think we should do season 3. So I was like, okay, like, you know what?
Am I wrong though?
I was watching season 3 and I was like, this is a This is the Bakugo season.
Okay, shut
Bakugo isn't
okay,
even
okay,
in
okay.
season 4.
I hate this. I hate this.
No, I'm
slander.
kidding. All jokes aside,
it is so
season
early
3
for this.
is definitely it's too early, yeah. In the podcast for this.
I'm already like wheezing.
It's a good season. It is.
Okay, so
I'm sorry.
Okay, back to talking about the show as a whole.
Yes.
I especially want to talk about it in the context of the shonen battle anime genre. I think as the genre has become more saturated over the years, there's very much a formula, right, to the shonen battle anime genre. And I think when people think of groundbreaking shows, they think of shows that are, oh my gosh, like thinking outside the box, never before seen.
Yeah.
Like, oh my gosh. But to me, I think the show is evidence that there is nothing wrong with formulaic writing. And I think it's actually great when a writer really knows their genre inside and out and can play within the tropes of that genre and just add enough of their own flair that it's engaging. And I think BNHA very much does that. And you can tell while watching this show that Horikoshi, the creator, is clearly a big fan of the big shonen anime works, you know, like Naruto, One Piece, that kind of stuff. And obviously Marvel Comics as well. So it's just really impressive, I think, that he can write within these very saturated markets and still make a story that can stand out and stand on its own and feel fresh, right? So for me, I can't talk about BNHA without talking about the genre as a whole, because I think that this is a near perfect execution of the shonen formula. Like, it has all the tropes and all the cliches of what you want and expect from a shonen anime, or a shonen battle anime specifically. And it doesn't necessarily subvert those tropes, but it also doesn't try to be anything that it's not. It's just a perfect execution of those things. It has a vibrant cast. It has the energetic, like, compelling main character. And it has an interesting semi-fantastical world. And it is constantly exploring the nuances of its society as well. And it just has well animated and well written fight sequences that really generate hype. And at the end of the day, hype is a big reason we watch shonen anime, right? Like, we want to feel like we're watching something cool. We want to feel our adrenaline pumping. And we want to get lost in like the spectacle of it all. But BNHA also isn't just spectacle. It also manages to balance all of its action and all of its multiple plot threads. And that's not an easy thing to do, right? Like, writing that is hard. Everything is building at such a good pace. And as a side note, I really love the retrospective narration of the show. Like, the fact that Deku narrates the show from some point in the future, I think
that's true.
It's just such a great narration device, I think, because not only is it a good way to do recaps, but it also adds a layer of maturity to any given scene, because you constantly have the presence of older Deku's like voice in the main story. So I just love that story within a story format. And I just think that the show is really good, and all of the hype it's gotten is very warranted, in my opinion.
So I definitely echo your opinions about it just being such a gem within the shonen genre of anime as a whole. For my overall impressions, me particularly, I'm a big sucker for the superhuman and superhero genre and the ensemble cast. You know in the first episode where Aizawa's just like, all right, let's do roll call, and he just like lists everybody in the class and their quirks. I was like, yes, like, this is what I need. Shonen fans love this kind of stuff. So as you said, it's a show that gives you everything you want in a shonen anime without feeling like it has to be something else, or without feeling like it has to overcome or transcend a certain formula or a certain mold, and just doing the best with what it has. Something that I really admire about the show is the use of very hard-hitting themes, and also the use of internal conflicts, and sometimes also very contentious and controversial subject matters to propel the story forward. I mean, we've got Shigaraki out here being like, what is justice? What is a hero? Is society truly just? You know, like, these questions are arguably very difficult to answer, but they serve as very interesting devices to propel the story forward and to also just like help our characters mature. And I just love when characters are able to learn from the people around them, from their environment, because that's what you want to see in a protagonist. I think that one of the formulaic keys to a successful protagonist is how they can mature, and you don't see that just happening in the main characters, you also see that happening in the villains in this show too. And then something that I love about the show that you also touched on is how well the creators and writer knows their characters and knows their story inside out. Because one of the greatest flaws of long-running shows, series, is that you don't keep your characters consistent. You want them to grow, you want them to develop, yes, of course, but you keep them consistent in their core values, their core attributes and traits. And sometimes that means knowing them as a 3-dimensional person, not just a 2D persona, and asking yourself, okay, at this point along in my character's journey, in this very dynamic situation or this very particular pressure, how do they react? And I think that that's so apparent throughout the whole season and the show. Really, like, you can really look at any moment in, for example, Bakugo's story, any monumental moment, and be like, yes, that makes sense that he would react in that way, or that these characters would react in this situation to this oppressive force. And I think that that is just what makes this show so cohesive. And it prevents the show from falling apart, you know, and that's a real fear with long running shows. And then finally, the first things that I noticed when I was watching this show is that this show is truly like a generational story. And what I mean by generational story is you see like all of these like father-son relationships almost, despite the lack of any blood presence. So we've got All For One and Shigaraki, All Might and Deku. You have Tomura being Nana Shigaraki's grandson, Todoroki and his father. And I think that generational stories provide your shows with a lot of flexibility. It adds a lot of weight and gravitas because you have this storyline that you're able to explore in a different time or a different space or setting, with different characters. And it also allows you to explore notions of inheritance, coming of age, passing on the torch, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Move on.
So yeah, we've separated the whole show into a few arcs. So we'll start with the introduction / training camp.
These 3 episodes I think that they are used very well and very efficiently because these episodes set the stakes for the rest of the season and for the next upcoming arc when the villains attack them. And you need that. You can't just go right into the action for any story, because I think setting the stakes is necessary to make conflict matter, right? If you don't care, or if you don't know what anyone wants, if you don't know where all the characters' headspaces are, what they're dealing with, what they're conflicted with, then it makes like all of the climactic scenes feel less climactic. So I think when we come into the season and we see very early what the villains have planned, it creates that foreboding and it reminds us what the danger of the season is right at the right moments. I also like that Aizawa Sensei, I think in episode 2 of this season, he brings attention to one of the core themes of this season, which is the fact that Class 1A and this new generation of heroes is being pushed prematurely into dangerous experiences, right? We are constantly getting this feeling throughout this show that this generation has it really tough, right? And that the adults are constantly grappling with the desire, obviously, to protect the students and protect the young generation, but also with the feeling that they can't coddle them because the threat to society is becoming much more imminent because of All Might's declining health, because they the status quo is shifting in society now, right? So I think that reminding viewers about this right before the villain attack and, right as they're starting their training arc, it gives the training arc a sense of real purpose and intensity. Because that what these kids are going through is not normal, and also just like it just keeps you on edge, right? Because the adults are on edge. You're nervous for them. So.
And that device raises the stakes too. Like, even just this training camp itself, you get the sense that these kids, their childhood is kind of being taken away from them prematurely, and that they are being forced to have to grow up a little bit too fast. So Koda's this kid that Class 1A meets at the training camp, and it's revealed that he's had a negative experience with heroes and villains, and that his parents were heroes and they were killed in the line of duty. And you get the sense that Koda is the exact kind of person that would be swayed easily by the League unless their minds were changed by an external force, because the path that he's on right now is not a great one. And then as Deku is listening to Koda's backstory, he gets flashbacks to Shigaraki. And then you realize that, Koda and Shigaraki have a very similar past in that they've had nobody to come save them, right? They've never experienced or encountered a hero that would be willing to put their life on the line for them. And I think that parallel it says something, because Shigaraki is constantly being compared to a child. It's said that he has a mentality of a child, and his response is very childlike.
Yeah, Koda he's very much like a trope, I feel like, in shonen anime, where you have like, the mean child who's gone through trauma and he doesn't like the protagonist because the protagonist is all sunshine and butterflies. But I think Koda is a very important character for this season, because I think it is essential that the show touches upon the idea that heroes die. Because
that's true.
One of my early complaints about the show before this season was that I want to see more.
Nobody's dying.
That. Like, I was like, where are people taking L's, right? I mean, they do take L's this season. There are some L's in this season. But I think it's essential that, not only we're reminded of that, but also Deku is reminded of that, because Deku is all sunshine and butterflies, right? He's making this whole hero thing seem like the best thing ever. And Deku definitely has like a martyr problem. You know what I mean? Like, he's constantly charging into battle with zero like thought about himself. Exactly. So, and he has to face the consequences of that later, right? Which is great, because I think in a lot of shonen anime, they make that whole like lack of selfishness seem like an amazing thing, a heroic thing. So for Deku to be like, oh yeah, if you die, you leave people behind. You make people worry about you, all this kind of stuff, right?
For sure.
So I think that was a very resonant theme for him this season. And so I think Koda and the way that his character interweaves with Deku's character this season was very good.
Koda also kind of serves as an important role for Deku's legacy, because I think this is probably one of the first times that we see Deku saving somebody that he barely knows, and that had a lasting impact on him and his career afterwards too. And we know, like, this is an interesting show because we know where Deku needs to end up. He's going to end up as the new hero icon, or the symbol of peace. And I think this arc was really the reason why the later arc with Eri is able to have a little bit more impact, because we see the way that season 4, him saving Eri, it took like the entire season, but it's validated by the emotions and plot threads that were first set into motion by this arc, which is just Deku being that person for somebody, that hero for somebody.
A lot of the time in shonen anime, you have the rookie characters going up against these really crazy villains, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, I'm thinking about Naruto right now. It's like, why would these 12-year-olds be able to outsmart these villains who are established as like super strong, right? As like elite.
Yes.
And I think that when I first watched this arc, I was like, oh, they're gonna do the thing where these students are going to be able to beat all of the League of Villains like willy-nilly. And there are some students who are able to hold their own in the fight, but they don't actually defeat anyone, right? No one actually has like a resounding victory or anything. And I think that's really important because it totally discredits your lore when your rookie characters are on par with your elite characters.
Agree.
So that's why I particularly liked the matchup of Aizawa Sensei and Dabi. Because if Dabi were to encounter any of the other students, like, who's going to be able to fight him? Because Dabi is clearly established to be one of the very strong villains, right? And he's also very smart and cold and calculated. Like, he's not like the other villains where they're just trying to, like, have fun. Like, Dabi looks like he could murder you and wouldn't think twice about it. So I like that it's Aizawa Sensei who goes up against him, because if it were anyone else, I'd be like, this is so unrealistic. Dabi would freaking kill their butts, you know?
Agree.
But yeah, let's talk about Deku versus... What's the villain's name?
Muscular. His name is Muscular.
Why did I put Muscle?
I literally didn't know his name, so I searched up Google muscular guy from BNHA, and it was like, Muscular. You got it.
Oh my god. I put Muscle Man in my notes. I don't know why I put Muscle Man. Oh my god, I put in my notes that he looks like Reiner from Attack on Titan.
Okay, so kind of on a similar note about something that shonen series also do a lot is, you know, we talked about this before, when the protagonist or the rookie is able to just pull through because of sheer willpower. Okay. Sometimes that annoys me. I understand there's a time and a place, but sometimes it does. I don't think that that's what happened here, though, in this scenario, though it could be taken that way.
Yes,
I think that, and the reason for that, for me, is because the entire show up to this point has been a development of setting up this atmosphere and raising the stakes, establishing that in this situation, there's no escape, there's no backup coming, and there's a life to be saved. If Deku doesn't do anything, he will literally die unless he escapes, or Koda will literally die.
Yeah.
So the stakes are high. And I think that amalgamating all of that into this and then having it culminate into a scene like this, it is much more hard-hitting and a much more compelling way of justifying when your protagonist is able to do something out of sheer willpower. Because that is kind of what he does. He goes beyond his 100% and defeats the guy after he's been, like, knocked around. He's, like, down on the ground. But because we know what's at stake here, it makes it a lot more understandable and realistic for me. How about you?
I also, I agree with everything you said. I want to talk a little bit about what makes a fight a good fight, because we were putting Fire Force on blast for not having clever fights, right? And I want to, I'm not going to retract that statement, but I do want to add a little footnote to it, because not every fight needs to be like that. But I think every good fight needs to have, one, physical stakes, which you mentioned. Deku would literally die. Koda will literally die. And then also, like, you know, Deku's about to break his body again. And emotional stakes, number two. And the emotional stakes here are Koda is seeing the villain that killed his parents. So he's confronting that.
The dramatic irony.
Yeah. And then the other emotional stake for Deku is that he is being thrust into a position of being a hero. And he doesn't know how to do that. And so you can see that he is basically just trying to act like one. And then the third thing is you need to have some kind of sense of progression in both of those things by the end of the fight. That's what makes a fight good. And so even though Deku just does what, like, one for all 1,000,000%, it still feels desperate. It still feels very engaging. And it's not like he just, he does kind of just pull it out of his butt, but it is tied to a piece of lore that we can understand. And that is that he gets that power, you know, similar to the Avatar state. He gets that power from previous generations. That works within the confines of the lore, within the confines of my understanding of the magic system. So it's fine. And and I like that there are consequences for Deku's actions here, right? Like he breaks his body in a way that he's really gonna have to, change how he fights going forward. So it was a good fight.
If I could put a footnote on your footnote. Okay. So I know you didn't mean it this way, but I know you meant it in a way that not every fight has to be like, oh, I outwit this other guy.
Yeah.
But I do think there's still an intellectual component in this fight, because knowing Deku as a character, he is very meticulous and methodical with how he goes about his fighting, whatever, his life. And he has this whole back and forth interaction with himself, basically weighing logically how feasible it's going to be to run away, fight this guy. He's so clearly outmatched. And so even though it is a punching fest, there is this sense that, it's not devoid of any intellect. It's not devoid of any thought.
Yeah. Before we continue, I want to talk about kind of Tomura or Shigaraki again, and this idea of like why they're targeting Bakugo, right? Because
yes,
I think it's okay. There's very much goes back into the shonen anime formula. Whenever you have the shouty, mean rival character, they're often set up to be that character that's going to be susceptible to evil manipulation. And there's nothing wrong with using it. But I remember when I was first watching this show where I was like, oh, here it is. Okay, Bakugo's going to become a villain. There's going to be seasons-long arcs to get him back. And I think that I was very surprised and happy that how the show chose not to go down that route. I really like that idea of Tomura seeing the potential in Bakugo to become a villain, because I think that this show constantly is exploring the theme of the fine line between hero and villain, right? And I think we kind of brought it up before, but the line between whether or not you become one or the other is very much how you feel like you're treated in society. And so for Tomura to see Bakugo and see how fiery he is and how he's lashing out at so many people, he's immediately like, let's get him, because we can use him. We can easily manipulate like his thoughts and stuff. So I think that was very interesting. But then it's also very interesting to see that that's not actually who Bakugo is.
And it's not just Bakugo either. I think that the League of Villains came in and also took Tokoyami, partly because of the just very dark, evil, quote unquote, nature of his quirk. And that's so like them. And then also that is so representative of what viewers are kind of expecting too. Like even you and I, if we were like, here it is, like here's when they're gonna convert. So I love that the show works so hard to make you believe that there's a side to these characters that you have to get to know, and it's a side that the writers already know. It's a side that the class of 1A and the UA staff and faculty already know, but they're not going to reveal it just yet. You'll see later how just because you are, maybe your quirk's more inclined to the darker side, or you have certain attributes or values that are, not the ideal of heroism, but that doesn't mean that you are a villain either.
Yes.
I would just like to talk about the sequence of scenes where Bakugo gets kidnapped, because it broke me. Okay, so here's why. So first, the sequence starts off with Aoyama bursting out of the bushes and shooting his laser naval laser.
Yeah.
And he drops the kids from his mouth.
We need a visual.
We need the visual. Yeah. Shoji reaches for and catches Tokoyami. And it gives you a little bit of hope. You're like, okay, we're in it. Okay, let's go. And the fact that it's Todoroki who reaches for Bakugo, barely catches him, misses him. Okay? In the end, in the most vital moments, it's Deku and Todoroki who are out here busting their butts to save Kachan, who, like, the two of them is kind of who Bakugo has the most tumultuous relationship with. But you see that in the most vital moments, they are busting their butts and they fail. And it just leaves you with this sense of like, wow, like the writers really built up all of this just for me to feel empty after. And the scream that Deku releases after that scene is over was so devastating. I was like, all right,
I literally put that in my notes.
It was heartbreaking.
Yeah.
And you know that you already know Deku's going to be kicking himself later because he could have ran faster. He could have reached further. He could have whatever. And it's just such a devastating loss for the kids and for UA and for heroes in general. Yeah, what do you think? I need a break.
So good. It's so good because characters need to take L's. And
yes,
I
agree.
I think that you can, because I think, when you think about a show where it's like, oh my god, characters are dying all the time, nothing ever works out, it's so dark, it's so grim. This show is not dark or grim, but it does know how to set the stakes and elevate the stakes properly while still maintaining the tone of the show as generally hopeful. Because if a character doesn't take L's, then you're just never going to be scared for your characters. You're never going to feel worried for them. And I want to feel worried for them. That's what makes
them.
Exactly, right? And so I think that this kidnapping for Bakugo it advances so many things. Okay, so now for the next part of the show, we're going into kind of the characters planning how to get Bakugo back, right? I really like that there is a collective acknowledgement from all the characters that it's kind of dumb for these kids to think that they can get Bakugo back from these villains, right? Ida is against it, obviously, right? And in your head, you're just like, okay, yeah, obviously Ida is against it because he's Ida. He's a goody two-shoes. But he's actually not against it just for that. He's more against it because he thinks that these characters are being hypocritical by acting on their emotions, when in season 2 they told Ida, don't act rashly and don't act on your emotions. And I really liked that because the writer did not need to have that for Ida. Him stepping in and just being like, I'm the class rep, don't do it. I would have totally accepted that because that's in line with Ida's character. He's always looking out for his class. But the fact that they're also adding that other layer of he doesn't want to see them make the same mistakes is just another really great sign of a good writer when they're thinking about things that the viewer won't even think about.
And so the writers do that like the whole season. Like there are so many other points in the season where they recall back to something that's happened and then show how that manifested or is now working to influence the lives, the present and the future of the cast. And Aizawa comes up with this line where he says, Bakugo is trying harder than anybody else to become that guy, that top hero. And if the villain saw his misdemeanor and his aggressiveness and thought they had an opening, then they're being short-sighted. And that line is so powerful because not only is it directed to the villains, to the media, but also kind of to the viewers, because at this point, as I said, the viewers are also kind of thinking, Bakugo's storyline is going one way when it was never really going that way at all. And it's not by reason of a particular character like withholding something or the writers hiding something from us, but it's simply because of a misinterpretation of his character that we have to get to know him better for. And something that we talked about in the Fire Force episode was the purpose and effectiveness of a good plot twist. And I think that this was a very good plot twist because it, as you said in that episode, it needs to make you rethink everything that had happened that is relevant to this plot thread or this point up until now. And I think it does that. It makes us rethink everything about Bakugo's character, his ambitions, his drive.
The truth is that, like, Bakugo doesn't really feel ostracized from society. Like, he is, I think that there's an element of him that, you know, respects and looks up to hero culture just as much as everyone else does. It just comes out in a completely different way.
Right.
And he actually cares so deeply about how he's viewed. Is he still a very unhealthy communicator? Absolutely.
Yeah.
But I'd like that in the press conference, Aizawa brings attention to the fact that a lot of how he conducts himself is also a product of him not being guided properly. That he, because basically the media is like, Bakugo seems very evil. he does seem very mad at UA and at the whole system. And Aizawa was kind of just like, that's just how he talks, and because he feels like that is what a hero is supposed to be, just like constantly, almost to a toxic level, very like strong and abrasive and overzealous. Yeah.
I will start off our conversation about All for One just talking about him as a villain, okay? I thought the most compelling thing for me in this fight, or in this sequence, was All for One's relationship with Shigaraki. I found very interesting because you see him being very gentle with him. And then when he reveals that Tomura was actually Nana's grandson, I think that it kind of makes you think about that relationship a little bit more. And just going back to what I said about this whole show being a generational story and the importance that this show places on that passing of the torch idea, I think it's particularly evil for me now to see All for One taking Shigaraki under his wing like that, because it's almost like All for One's way of defiling that lineage, and another way for him to show All Might that, hey, here's another way in which you failed by failing to provide for, care for, protect your master's own descendants.
I like that this fight is All Might's fight.
Yeah.
I'm always thinking about, like, what does this mean for Deku's character? What does the aftermath of this fight mean for him? And what it means for him is that it essentially brings home that point, or that theme of like the responsibility and the pressure that is on Deku's shoulders. Because we've been feeling that in the first 2 seasons, but this is the season where that finally reaches a fever pitch, and Deku is finally seeing the realness, the reality of what it means to be All Might's successor, right? And so we see that in the shot of when everyone is cheering because All Might won, and Deku, it kind of like, it shows that he's crying, right? I think it was just like such a powerful scene. It was such a powerful moment, and it brings this grand like fight, this punchy fight in the air, in the sky, back down to Deku, to our main character, and it reminds us of like, this is actually what this means for Deku, for the plot, for society. And I really like that. I also like the musical motifs that are used for All for One and All Might. All Might has like, his sort of theme songs are always like, they're always in a major key. They always have like brass, horn, instrumentation, very triumphant, right? And then One for All, his musical motif is like an organ and an opera. Yeah. Okay, so after the fight with One for All versus All, or not after, during the fight of All Might versus One for All, the kids realize that All Might cannot save Bakugo. He's too busy. So they need to save him. This is a great scene. I'm not going to talk too much about it because we're going to talk about it again later.
Yes.
Perhaps I've watched this scene 20 times. Perhaps I've cried watching it at least 10 of those times. Who knows?
I don't know. No one
can prove that. There's no evidence. I want to talk a little bit about hype, because that's not something that I talked about yet. And I do feel like it's relevant here, because this is one of the most hype moments in the season, when they're able to rescue him. And for me, I was reflecting a lot about, what does hype actually mean? And I think
that's a good question.
What this scene made me realize is that hype is about the feeling of anticipation and release all in the same moment, right? When you get that good buildup, and then when you get that like oof, that like swell of music,
Yes.
that awesome visuals, and when that is able to be tied in with whatever the current internal, external conflicts and character dramas are. Like, yeah, just like Deku's whole thought process about it, and how he specifically says that, you know, it's a little bit sad in the way that he says, like, it can't be me that reaches out for him. It can't be anyone else. It has to be Kirishima. It has to be you. There's just like a lot of things going on, and I really liked the way that it was shot. So that's all I'm gonna say.
I will
about that
say
for now.
that I think the animation for this sequence is what, like, peak. Like, this show peaked animation wise for this sequence.
It's so good.
I literally in my notes I literally wrote it's like the animation team was like, okay, everybody, here is the piggy bank containing the funds for the Bakugo flying through the air scene. Don't touch it because we need it. Okay. And the fact that they replayed the scene, like they had the shot of him coming off the ground from his explosions, and then they reanimated that scene from a distance so you could see just how far he was traveling, and then they reanimated it from a third angle to show you like how he flies through the air and grabs Kirishima's hand. And I'm so glad that the writers are aware of what points in animators are aware of what points in the story require that Sakuga effect, require that budget, you know?
Yes.
And as you said, you know, it's a good question to ask, what exactly is hype? If sometimes you have a lot of anticipation, and if it builds up to a climax that is a little lackluster, that ruins the hype. Or if the other way around, you need both. And I'm just glad that writer and animator were so in tune with what needs to be, with where the effort has to go. Yes, exactly. Let's talk about home visits. Shall we talk about home visits?
Yes, please. Oh, let's do it. Okay.
I have a lot of notes about the Midoriya household. I don't know if you had any notes about the Bakugo household.
I have notes about
I'll let you go
the parents in general.
Okay. Go ahead.
Yeah, I won't be too long. So after Bakugo is rescued, we have what I consider to be two like cool down episodes or aftermath episodes before the next big arc. So yes, I want to talk about anime parents.
We love them.
I love that this show has parents. I love that this show has parents because parents do not exist in shonen anime.
They don't.
They simply do not. And I understand that having a parent die or something, it can be like a legitimate catalyst for a character. But I think that there's something about the show that just feels so much more realistic and hard-hitting to see the presence of healthy families in this show, because family does play such a huge role in how, like, who someone is.
And this isn't to say that broken families or families experiencing death of a parent are not relatable or realistic.
Yes, 100%.
But it is so clearly used as either a plot device or as a way to just get the parents out of the way, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, or it's like gratuitous trauma.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But in the case of Todoroki, I think that even though it is not a nuclear family, it is still more relatable than the non-nuclear families in some other shows, because you see the immediate aftermath and effects of that kind of family on Todoroki and his father.
Yeah.
And then in in season 4, we go into a lot more about how somebody like that, like Endeavor, can redeem themselves after coming from such a horrific past that he dealt upon his own family. And so it's never, as you said, it's not gratuitous in any way, the way that Todoroki's family is portrayed at all.
Okay, yeah. So going back to Bakugo's mom, I love how she says, Katsuki is reckless and really good at everything. He was also blessed with a good quirk, so he's had other people fawning over him all the time. He kept getting praised for shallow stuff. I love this quote because I think that it's very essential that the show brings attention, that the show is starting to bring attention to the fact that everyone perceives Bakugo a certain way. And
Yeah.
his mother obviously realizes that, like, that is actually a flaw because it has built up so much of who he is and so much of what his perceived self-value is. So it makes sense that she would stop and say, like, honestly, he did it to himself, which is not true. But the fact that she makes it seem like that is a stepping stone for what Bakugo's character is dealing with later on in the season, which I'll talk about. What else do I want to say? Okay, I do want to talk about the Midoriya household, if you don't mind.
Yes, yes.
Okay, so Inko, Deku's mom, is like
Inko!
my everything. So, okay, all I'm gonna say about this scene with Deku's mom and All Might is, I think that it's so powerful that she straight up is like, I don't like this. I don't like that Deku's a hero. I don't want him moving into the dorms. I just feel really uncomfortable with it because he's my son and I want to protect him. And I think that Inko's speech here really serves to remind us about what's actually at stake. Kids' lives, right? And if you think about it, who would want this to happen, right? Like, who would want to put their kid through this? And just not a lot of anime really explores the role that parents can have in their kids' lives. And we do see that Deku's, love for his mom does really come through for his character in a lot of ways, where it also forces Deku to think less about himself and to to see selfishness as a good thing, as a way that protects the people that you love from worrying about you, because he stops and he realizes that he uses this line that's like, this was the consequence of me ignoring my mom's feelings this whole time.
The creators of the show must be so proud after having finished this scene, because not only is it all those points that you said about anime parents and shonen in general and about revealing what's at stake here, but it also, just the execution of the scene itself, it starts quietly at the kitchen table. They're just having a conversation. There's some tea and some cake. And each transaction of dialogue just serves to up the tension and elevate it and add more passion to it until eventually you get this entire scene escalated into a very emotionally cathartic moment. And I think that for me, I don't know, I cried during the scene.
The tears.
I was crying. Because, as you said, of course a parent would feel this way about their child, right? And it is so it is so convenient for you if you would have just brushed it under the rug. But instead, this show chose to give it a full 6 to 8 minutes to marinate and deliberate over it in the spotlight over screen time. And, Inko even says, I saw your fight, as she talks to All Might, I saw your fight as a regular citizen, I'm thankful, of course, you saved us, thank you, and that what I say doesn't take away from how grateful I am to you, but as a parent, I know my son, and I know that Deku looks up to All Might, and if he's gonna go down the same path as you, I don't want him ending up there. And I think that is so great for this plot development in general, because if you're gonna convince me that these characters are still kids, there are so many times in this show where they say they're just kids, they use that to raise the stakes, right? They're rookies fighting against this evil league of villains. So if you're gonna convince me that these are still kids, then show me that you're not going to that you're gonna navigate these limitations and restrictions and real worries that kids are gonna have to face, that being parental permission or thinking about how your parents feel, their emotions. And these are I don't know, these are basic emotions that you would think would be integrated into the storyline, but because I guess a lot of shows just don't want to have to deal with parental permission. Oh my,
Yeah.
you know, it's that toxic view of parents or the older generation as being overly draconian or restrictive, and therefore you cannot have your big adventure because of it. Yeah, I think that has to go.
Or you just have parents that are just like, oh yeah, you want to be a hero? That's great.
Exactly.
Like in Pokemon, when Ash leaves his house to become a Pokemon master at age 10, and his mom is just like, yeah, good for you. Like, what? He's 10.
Yeah, and you know what? It's not like Inko isn't supportive. She is so
she
supportive.
Is. She
to the
really
point
wants
where,
him to be happy.
Exactly. To the point where she does allow him eventually.
She does allow him, yeah.
But it's because the characters had to work for it. And it goes back to that idea of, okay, is this thing emotionally earned? And I think that in this sequence, in this scene, it is, because they fall to the floor begging. Like, I don't know.
Yeah.
How much
and
more.
She agrees on the condition that, Deku realizes that something has to change. Like, if my mom is gonna trust me with this, then I have to change how I conduct myself.
Yeah.
And take care of myself. And he does.
Next thing I have is moving into dorms.
The way this episode made me cry.
Okay, can we skip straight to the end?
Okay, yeah, so skipping to the end. So moving into dorms, this is when the kids move into the dorms. And what I love about this episode is that it starts off and you're like, oh, filler. You're like, it's lighthearted. It's just, it's borderline dumb, right?
Yeah.
It's supposed to be kind of the comedic episode that follows all the action, right? But then, at the end of the episode, Ochako pulls aside Deku, Momo, Todoroki, Ida, I think it is. And she's like, oh, Su-chan has something she wants to say. And I don't know why there was something about that whole sequence that just felt really relatable to me. There was something about it that made me feel like, I'm just like thinking back to when I was younger and you're hanging out with a big group of friends.
I know exactly
and there's like,
what you're gonna say. Yeah.
Exactly, right? Like there's something about it that's like, clearly something has happened in the group that no one's really talking about it. And then finally someone is like, I want to cut through the tension. I want to address the elephant in the room. And so there's this collective moment of clearing the air, right? And I think this really goes back into those themes of like found family and how much class 1A really cares about each other, that they're having this moment of like reconciliation and saying like, she's owning up to her hurtful words and acknowledging them. And even though the other party didn't even think of them as emotion or as hurtful, just the fact that she is able to get it off her chest, I thought was so endearing. And it also makes all the characters realize like, oh, I'm so sorry that you felt that way, you know? And it's just like, it's just such a nice character moment that didn't have to exist in this episode.
It didn't have to
It didn't have to exist. But the fact that it does makes it better, you know? And I just thought that was really nice.
I started this episode being like, oh my gosh, thank you, writer Neem, for giving me an episode where I could just relax and have fun. And by the end of this episode, I was like, I did not have fun.
I was like, why am I crying?
And I think that it is so poignant to have that scene at the end of this episode because, as you said, it kind of seems like a filler episode, right? Like it seems like an episode where you can just, it doesn't really have anything to do with the plot or anything at all with our character, the growth of our characters. But then you realize that the whole thing was kind of set up to be this way in which the characters could forget about the emotional traumatic experiences that they've just been through.
Yeah.
And this show does a great job of that, of recognizing that our characters are traumatized sometimes.
Yeah.
Okay? So they
were attacked by villains twice now.
Yes.
Yeah.
And as you said, this show could have easily brushed the issue aside, but because they respect their characters, especially their auxiliary and bystander characters, they choose to linger on those feelings and not only that, but they also use it so that our main characters can learn from it and mature, because now they know, okay, like I'm in this whole journey where I'm learning that I have to be more aware of other people's emotions and what they're thinking. And that's not gonna just help them grow as fighters or heroes, but it's gonna help them grow as people too. Okay, let's talk about the provisional licensing exam as well as some of the training that leads up to it.
Episode 52 is all about the characters needing to come up with their own signature move, right? So shonen, right? But it's, for Deku, it's not just about like, what kind of punch should I make? Like, what kind of like new fighting move should I make? It's elevated in the sense that it's not just about that. It's also about, how do I find my own identity with this quirk that has been given to me by someone else.
And that hurts me sometimes too.
And that hurts me. That is physically breaking my body. And it becomes this moment where he realizes for 3 seasons, he has been imitating All Might. He's been imitating what he thinks he's supposed to do instead of making it his own.
And we also follow his train of thought in the way that he learns from the characters around him, because he gets the idea for full cowling from Gran Torino, from Bakugo, and he learns from Ida to like change his fighting style, and the whole like the source where he got the idea to use his legs was looking at his friend and seeing this is literally the source of his entire power. How can I tap into that?
I love when I can really understand how a character comes up with an idea and not just like out of thin air.
Yes, exactly.
Full cowling. Yeah.
I have legs. Amazing. Okay.
Yeah.
So they do all this training in preparation for this provisional licensing exam, which features students from all over the country. And it's interesting, you know, there's a little bit of a twist in this arc where they find out that UA students are usually targeted first because their sports festivals broadcasted, so their quirks are usually made known to the general public.
Everyone knows who they are already.
Love story continuity.
We love that. We love when the writer thinks of world building elements that we didn't even think about. Yes. But then when they bring it up, we're like, oh, that's so true.
I should have thought about that.
I should have thought about that.
Anyways. Okay. Something you talked about earlier that I think is also relevant here. If you're going to split up your main cast, you got to do it in a way that's interesting, because the whole point of doing that is to show the various interesting and creative combinations that you can make based off of the groupings that you have.
Yes.
I just love that.
I love that too.
Shonen, purely shonen like device.
Yeah. Okay, I do want to talk about first Shiketsu's Inasa. I like his character because not only does it set up some stuff about Endeavor's character arc in the next season, but I also think that his interaction with Todoroki is very important in this season, because Todoroki really comes to terms with his communication and how he comes off and kind of the consequences of that. And I think that's another building block for some of the stuff that he has to deal with his dad in future seasons.
And it's great because these two are exact perfect character foils. Like they're so different from each other in every way, in their motivations, personalities. But it's their experiences and their desire to do good and their extremely high intellect and power that they're able to work together. So even though it wasn't a monumental or particularly pivotal scene, it was still quite heartwarming, and that's something that this show does really well. To convert scenes like that into very compelling moments.
I agree. Another scene I really liked, or another fight I really liked, because there's a lot of mini fights happening in this exam arc. I like that Momo gets a moment here.
I love that moment.
We don't get to see a lot of the girls in general, but I do like that Momo gets a moment of leadership, because I think the last time she really had a moment was maybe back in season 1 or something. I like that Momo is very intelligent. And so the nature of her quirk is that, you know, she's not really powerful in any way, but she can make anything that she wants. And so the nature of her quirk is that she has to think very hard about and very cleverly about how she makes things, and how she like uses her quirk to its like full potential. Any other fights stand out for you?
Yeah.
Go on.
Bakugo, Kirishima, and Denki.
Baku Squad. I love Baku Squad.
I just love that they are up against Seiji, who is this guy who's like, he talks so much and he talks in a way that's like, he's above everybody else. It's highly intellectual. But little does he know that these three muscle heads don't even understand a word he's saying. I just think that's so funny.
He's like trying to be so intellectual.
It was also just a great moment to appreciate Kaminari, and appreciate another moment where UA peeps are just appreciating Bakugo for who he is.
Yeah.
And not who they think that he should be or how other people think he might be. Because the whole emotional aspect of that fight is that Seiji is kind of accusing these guys as being so hot-headed and not sophisticated enough to be part of UA even, because UA has such a reputation. And it's just so ironic that at the end he's defeated by Denki, who is arguably the dumbest out of
I love him.
all three of them.
So Bakugo and Todoroki fail. They're the only ones in class 1A that fail. I like this for many reasons. I think first of all, it shows again that idea of what it means to be a pro hero is rooted equally in how you conduct yourself, how you talk to people, how you communicate, and how you think about like the people around you, right? And that's something that Bakugo and Todoroki especially have to deal with, because they're just not good at interacting with people, right? And their class cuts them a lot of slack for that, but other people are not going to. So that's one reason I like it. And then the other reason is that I think failure is a very humanizing experience. So when you see characters fail, it immediately makes them less one-dimensional, I think, especially when you have characters like Todoroki and Bakugo, who just seem so unflinching and so unwavering.
I want to focus a little bit also on how the rest of the class got to pass, because you do hear the commissioner say not a lot of people pass this exam. And to see that, and to go in with the expectation that not everyone in class 1A is going to pass, and that maybe some from the bottom might not pass, and to know that everybody does, like, that set a very hopeful tone. And I think that this is something that the show does well in general, because when you think of BNHA, you don't think of a dark, gritty film that is over cynical in any way. It's very hopeful and optimistic. And I do think that there's a place for dark and gritty films, and there's also a very special place for optimistic shows as well, just like this one. In a pandemic, I really need some good news, so I need a happy ending sometimes. Okay, so I was really happy to see the rest of the class pass. Let's talk about Deku v Kachan. So okay, I'll start talking because it is evident that Kris is in no position to talk right now.
Why don't you go?
Yeah. So there's a lot to unpack with this, and we will systematically go through all of our points. We'll get there eventually, even though there is the temptation to just go, I love this scene. Okay. Anyways, this scene is a pivotal moment for the show as a whole, because it is essentially our first time seeing Bakugo so vulnerable, so honest, essentially having this mental breakdown from having to have held all these thoughts, these concerns and worries in his head for so long. And it's hype in a way that's like more catharsis than excitement. It's very cathartic. Bakugo had been using all this time to think about, okay, like, how did Deku get this quirk, and obsessing over it, right? Like, he kind of has this complex that comes from their childhood about having always been praised by and looked up to by Deku, and now he's having a hard time putting aside his pride. Honestly, like, this kind of thing would, I can see it being troubling for anybody, but because we know Kachan and we know that he has a ton of pride that has just been cultivating over his entire life, it makes sense that his character would be so troubled by this. And it also makes sense that his character would want to seek to resolve this through a physical fist fight, you know? Like, not tears. Well, there were tears, but
later.
Later. But not a forthright discussion. He wants to fight it out, you know? And not only is that great for hype building and just setting up an interesting scene, but also it's great for, like, him.
This episode, when I first watched it, it turned into something that I wasn't expecting. It was refreshing to see two characters who have so much tension and so much history between them actually have an episode that is dedicated to them learning how to
talk it out too as they're fighting.
There's conversation, right? It's dedicated to them learning how to see eye to eye and learning how to understand one another, and it's not just all fighting. Like, there is actual conversation that cuts to the core of their beef, essentially. And I just have a lot of feelings about the way Horikoshi decided to write these two, because they're very much a relationship of contradictions, if you think about it, right? Like, these guys are not even friends. They used to be when they were maybe toddlers or something, but growing up, they've never really been friends. And on the surface, there's so much awkwardness and hostility between them, but beneath that, there are just two people who have a lot of unresolved emotions that have been festering for too long. And in this scene, they finally allow each other to see their most vulnerable versions of themselves, which I just think is really powerful. And I think for Deku, it's a wake-up call that he doesn't actually know his childhood friend as much as he might have thought that he did. Of the whole show, it's clear that Deku has never really given up his attachment to Bakugo. Like, even in the way that he never stops calling Bakugo by his childhood nickname, and Bakugo never stops. Like, he never asks Deku to not call him by his childhood nickname.
So soft.
Like, there's so much intimacy, or not, maybe not intimacy, but like there's a closeness.
Familiarity,
Yeah, there's a very special closeness between them that always exists in all of their interactions, even when they're at each other's throats. So I think even that within itself is foreshadowing to this moment. And I think Deku realizes that Bakugo's perceived hatred, is just a manifestation of his inferiority complex, right? Like you said. And I think that realization is what helps Deku work through his own complicated feelings about Bakugo, which he's never really done. And I think the quote that was so powerful for me was when Deku says that you are an amazing person, much closer to me than All Might. The image of victory inside of me is of you. I love this quote. I think that's the thesis statement because it shows that underneath the surface,
definitely,
Deku has seen his relationship with Bakugo as one of the most important in his life. Like, more than All Might, Bakugo has been the symbol of motivation for him, for Deku. And I think for Deku to say that, it's just so cathartic. It's just, this whole scene is so cathartic, and the build up to it is so cathartic. So I just love, I love that for Deku.
I think the reason why, partly, this scene is so emotional, aside from being flashy, is because it's set in this setting that is just so quiet and dark. Yeah. It's like this entire blank canvas for the two characters to just fight it out, talk it out, yell it out. And for those emotions to easily come to the surface. And I like what you said about Deku's response, because at first you can see that he's kind of wary about fighting on school grounds in the middle of the night. So at first he says, you know, like, we're gonna get in trouble. There's probably a better time and a place for this. Or when Kachan is kind of opening up about his admiration being in vain, maybe, for All Might, Deku tries to console him and saying, no, like, it's you're fine, like, you've been doing everything right. So he tries to take the easy way out. And as he's going, he realizes that nothing's gonna stop Bakugo at this point. Yeah. Because for Bakugo, it's not about words, right? We know this because he spends the entire show saying, shut up, you're talking too much, to like random people, right? So for him, it's all about action. It doesn't really matter at this point what Deku's got to say to him. Yeah. And so he realizes that, okay, even though there may not be much meaning in our physical fight, I have to do it. Because if I don't, I'm going to be rejecting Kachan's feelings. And when he says that, I was thinking about that line, and I was thinking, I don't think this is like a temporal or a spatial thing. I think it's, you know, that feeling when people come to you with their problems and you don't really have anything to do with those problems, but you try to console them. You're an ear for them to rant, but ultimately you are detached from the situation and you can't truly accept those feelings. But in this case, Bakugo's feelings of hate, anger, confusion, disappointment, they're directed specifically at Deku and at All Might. So if he... So Deku realizes that, okay, if this is a situation where if I left or if I rejected Kachan in this moment, it's going to be a rejection of the validity of those feelings. Yeah. And so I'm glad that we were able to see that progression. As we said, like, this show does a good job of showing how our characters get to a certain point. And yeah, like, just Deku having Bakugo as like his ultimate, okay, not his ultimate, but like that next step that he wants to take, right? All Might is arguably the ultimate goal. Yeah. But Bakugo is the one that, okay, I have a chance of reaching it, you know? Like, I've always wanted to be like you. I've always been running after you. And so to see Bakugo now in this state must have been jarring for him. But it's just, I don't know, it squeezes your heart so much to see like these two characters that you've developed these affections for and you want to protect, and they are being so sad. Sorry, I'm getting emotional. All right, I'll throw it back to you now. I'll throw it back to you.
Okay, I'm ready. I need to just bite the bullet.
Each other
I need
here.
to bite the bullet. So I'm going to talk about Bakugo's character in this scene now. I'm going to... I know it's very clear that obviously Bakugo is my favorite character in the show, but he wasn't before. He wasn't until this particular episode, because up until this point, Bakugo is not only cold to Deku, he's just verbally abusive. Like, he's a bully.
He's a bully.
And he's intentionally written and introduced as a very flawed character because he's supposed to be completely opposite to Deku in every single way. So he's hostile, he's naturally talented, and he's very egotistical. So the way that he evolved by this episode was very interesting and unexpected for me, because in this scene, and you touched upon it, he has this amazingly written and amazingly voice acted emotional breakdown in front of Deku, where he starts sobbing because everything that has been plaguing him is finally bubbling to the surface in a way that no one really noticed. So, you know, he feels like he's being surpassed by Deku of all people, who is like the epitome of weakness in his eyes. And he blames himself for being kidnapped. He thinks that he ended All Might's career because he was kidnapped. And we see him realizing that Deku is not only becoming stronger, but he was handpicked by All Might to be his actual successor. Yeah. So of course Bakugo is going to have that negatively affect his feeling of purpose and value. And I think the reason that this huge catharsis for him feels earned is because it's been building for 3 seasons. All of the groundwork has been laid, and it makes us as an audience realize that there's another dimension to Bakugo's character that's been there and we never realized. And so seeing him cry is very humanizing, because Bakugo is the one that has been the most affected by everything. And no one ever asked Bakugo if he was okay. No one ever checked in on him because everyone just assumes that he is okay. One of the lines that is so good, and I feel like perfectly captures this, is when Bakugo asks All Might why he chose Deku to be his successor. And All Might tells him that, I chose Deku because you were already strong. And Bakugo replies with, but I'm weak too. And sorry, I need to pause. That is just so heartbreaking, isn't it? Like, it challenges everything that we thought we knew about his character. So I love that this
Sorry,
is
I'm like so depressed right now.
Sorry. Should we have put this in dumpster fire? It's too early for this. Text to
Like,
watch.
I'm
It's
so
too early for
depressed.
this. Sorry.
Why do we take this so seriously? I'm sorry. Keep going.
It's okay.
That was just a hard line. Like, I can't believe you
It
said
is,
that
right?
line out loud. Yeah.
I practiced saying it. I practiced
Good
saying
job.
it last
I'm
night
proud of
because
you.
I was like, if I might start crying. This is so embarrassing.
I'm proud.
This is the most embarrassing episode I've ever shot. Okay. Back on track.
Yes.
So yes, this line to me is the line that has just been building for Bakugo. And I love that this is the thematic culmination of his character for this season, because not only does it highlight how the strongest people on the outside are still just as emotionally fragile as everyone else, but it also
Good point. Good point.
Yes, it also explicitly brings attention to how the adults have kind of not failed, but maybe neglected their education and guidance for Bakugo, because All Might basically realizes that he never checked to see if Bakugo was okay, and he hugs Bakugo and tells him essentially that it's not your fault and none of this was your fault. And I love that, because in anime, teenagers, like we said, they go through traumatizing stuff. And no one ever talks about how messed up that is. But this show is always being like, oh, we're checking in on our characters' mental health. We're making sure that they're okay. The teachers are always concerned about that. But no one ever thought to check in on Bakugo. And then that's why he feels like he's having this explosion of emotion. And this becomes the turning point for Deku and Bakugo's relationship. They're finally able to air out all of their feelings that have been sitting between them their entire life. And in my opinion, it makes Deku and Bakugo's relationship one of the most compelling central elements of the story. And I love that All Might says that, like, Deku always admired Bakugo's strength and Bakugo always feared Deku's heart. And All Might has some banger lines in this scene. Like,
It does.
So I love that this episode is all about seeing eye to eye and them realizing, like, them respecting each other, because that's kind of what's at the core of what it means to really be rivals. And okay, the last thing that I'm gonna say, I swear, the last thing that I want to say is that this season made Bakugo's character shoot up in popularity polls. For like Shonen Jump or whatever. And I think people have a lot of conflicting feelings about that, because I know that there are a lot of people that still don't really like Bakugo's character. And I understand that. Some people might say that this isn't enough to be considered a redemption arc. Like, he's still super mean to everyone.
I disagree.
And he's still... I'm going to say that there are some stuff that he says to Deku that are really mean. Like, really mean. And that's totally true, but I obviously disagree. But I think whether or not you personally see it as a redemption arc for him, I think it's undeniable that this makes him a more layered character. And in my opinion, a character does not have to be likable for them to be well written. So, I mean, Bakugo is not likable if you think about it as a person, but he's no longer one-dimensional. He has so many different facets to him that have finally been revealed in this season. And so that's why I think that he is one of the best written characters in the show following this episode specifically. And that's why he became my favorite character. It wasn't until this scene that I was like, oh my gosh, I love what they did with him.
I'm so glad you were able to be so eloquent about that, because
Thanks,
I
oh my
honestly think you
God.
summarized it like great. Like I definitely agree with
It took a lot of work. My
every
notes
single thing
are
you said.
34 pages long. So,
I definitely agree. And during like while watching this scene, I was asking myself what about it made it so emotional. Like why did it like instigate such a visceral reaction in
it's
me?
so cathartic. I was like
And I
sobbing.
think that it's because these kinds of emotions and feelings are so complicated and so messy. Like, it's no longer just, I'm mad at you, I hate you because you did this to me. You know, it's not just this bilateral thing. It
Yeah.
has so, like, the issues itself, the relationships themselves are layered and they're so
Yeah.
messy. And that is just the root of so many relational problems in life, like
Yeah.
miscommunication, not being able to understand each other, not being able to see eye to eye.
Making assumptions about what
Mhm.
certain like interactions actually mean. Yeah.
Exactly. And so it does have kind of a relatable emotional impact in that sense as well. And I like that All Might stepped in at the end, and it wasn't just a
Yes.
teacher coming in to be like, hey, wrap it
Stop
up, boys.
fighting.
It was All Might seeing the mess he's done, that he's made.
Yeah.
You know, like
Yeah.
as an adult, he is not perfect and he's messed up. And this is what's culminated out of that. So this is a mess that he has to fix. And after the whole interaction, we see, whereas we used to see Bakugo as purely a character foil for Deku,
Yeah.
we now know him to be the missing piece, because now we see Bakugo and Deku together as being able to succeed All Might. And we see the rivalry be finally established, because if you think about it, the rivalry up until this point has been a little bit awkward, because it was so disproportionately one-sided that Deku was always running towards this image of himself that he wanted to be, that was modeled after Bakugo. But Bakugo was never really, you know, getting anything out of it. And I don't think that's a very good rivalry. So if you think about it, it was a little bit wonky up until that point. But now it's like rivalry established. You know, these two characters from here on in are going to be pushing each other, moving forwards together. And they're going for the same goal, which is to be All Might. And afterwards, when they're vacuuming together alone,
And they actually have a conversation.
Like, it's hard to find the words to describe how emotional I get when I think about the character writing of this scene, or how it was executed, or like
executed across multiple seasons. Because when you think about catharsis, you can't just have an emotional scene. You have to put all of the right building blocks in place for that catharsis to feel like for it to really hit you hard. So,
and honestly, the emotions are tripled by Nobuhiko's voice acting. Like, I don't think that I could have felt that same emotional impact without his voice cracks, expertly timed voice cracks, and the amount of passion put into his voice acting. Like, voice acting sometimes on our pod, I feel like, doesn't get enough credit, but I don't want to do that for this guy.
Let's talk about it in this scene, at least for Bakugo, because usually we talk about VAs in another section outside of the writing, but I feel like Nobuhiko's performance, specifically in this scene, is everything, because what he does with his voice to do Bakugo's regular speaking voice is crazy. He's basically shouting all the time, and that's the voice that we associate with Bakugo in our head. And so the way that he's able to perform in such a way that you slowly hear the screams turn into these it's like you're hearing
Wailing.
it crumble. Yeah, and the voice cracks and the crying. It's just,
and it starts with
so
a
good.
couple of lines where he's speaking normally too, because we know that Bakugo has this side of him that's very calculated, intelligent, and he does spend a lot of time in his head. So when he gives those lines of when he's more soft spoken or just thinking and having that escape under his breath, it's like, you know that you're drawn in, and you know that this is going to be a moment that is full of tension. And then
because he the way that slowly stops yelling.
Yes, and
it's
the
like kind of
dynamic range that he has is really crazy.
Okay, so for our next segment on the podcast, we like to do the Bechdel test. So the Bechdel test is a measure of female representation in any given piece of media, and it was devised by a cartoonist named Alison Bechdel, and it has 3 questions. Number 1, are there at least 2 named female characters? Number 2, do they speak to each other? Number 3, do they speak to each other about something other than a male love interest? So,
dun 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 dun.
This show passes.
It does
all right.
pass. Actually, as a whole, I feel as though this show does have echoes of Leave It to the Man.
Okay.
I mean?
Yeah.
It has echoes of that, because you see that most of our main characters are male. Most of the very strong characters are male. And I'm not saying that this is going to ruin the show for me by any means.
No.
I'm just
we fully said it
pointing
passes,
it out. Right? Like the whole point of the Bechdel test is not to demean any show in any way.
No.
It's just to point it out, because it needs to be pointed out sometimes. So it does echo that sentiment.
Like everything that you said, I do think that the girls and the women in this show don't get as much screen time or fleshed out backstory than the other male side characters. They just don't get as much attention, and I think that is important to point out. Why don't you start us off about fan servicey stuff?
So I actually appreciate the amount of fan service in this show, and it's because it feels as though the creators of this show have an awareness about just how much fan service is often given to female characters. So for example, even episode 1 of the season, the swimming scene, or the swimming episode, when Mineta and Kaminari rent the pool just to see the girls in their bathing suits, and the plot, like the comedic plot twist is that nope, it's the dudes. Like the dudes are all like taking their shirts off, and the girls are in like their one pieces. It's pretty comical, but it does feel as though the creators are like, we're not gonna go there. Let's go a different direction.
We're not gonna do the scene with the girls in the bikinis.
Exactly. And on that note, I kind of appreciate the presence of a character like Mineta. And I know that he gets harped on a lot. Honestly, it's not like I like his character or anything. I just appreciate his presence, because he says really a lot of things that I think conventional, more fan servicey series would have milked the heck out of. But this way, BNHA is able to keep the fan service regulated because through one character. Do you know what I mean? Like whenever Mineta is like, agree. I want to see the girls bathing, and he's like climbing up the wall, he always gets comedy gold. He always gets his retribution. You know, he gets scolded or he gets hurt. And we get the sense of Mineta purposefully being a character that is supposed to be annoying or particularly shameless, and so I like his character in the way that the show is able to tunnel all of the fan service through this one character and control it.
This is not to say that there is something inherently wrong with showing female bodies. Like there's nothing wrong with having a scantily clad female character. Like there's nothing wrong with that. It is only uncomfortable and problematic when it's clearly over sexualized, or it's clearly gratuitous, or there's no acknowledgement from the characters themselves that it's wrong. You know, the fan service is a
fine line to be drawn, to be honest, and it's hard to tread it. And so we're not purporting to say this is too much or this is too little. But I think that it is telling when a scene makes you feel uncomfortable versus a scene that makes you laugh. So I think that there is a difference, even if the line is fine. So Okay, setting aside everything about Ochiko being so cute and best girl, I want to talk a little bit about her crush on Deku. To be honest,
yeah.
I really liked this.
Me
I really
too.
liked it. And I think that there are scenes that they explore. Like, BNHA is by no means a romantic show or a romantic comedy. And the romance is really, really kept to a minimum here. But there are moments that the show chooses to linger on. And so I just really like that, even though it's never put fully into the spotlight, there's never a big romantic gesture or a confession or anything.
Yeah.
They choose to explore those emotions. And then during the licensing exam, she says, oh, like, I have to put these emotions away for now. And that's not at all her being in denial of her emotions, but it's her recognizing, like, I'm in a situation of crisis right now. Like, I need to focus or I'm not getting my provisional license. I can't think about this. And these are all just various dimensions of having a crush on somebody, you know?
Yes. I agree. Okay. There's something about Ochiko that I loved from day one. I don't know what it is. I think it's just that when I think about a shonen heroine, they always fall flat because I think a lot of the times they are easily reduced to love interest or damsel in distress. But I think with this show, it's established really early on that Ochiko has her own aspirations that are driving her forward and that are completely independent from any other character. And I like that she doesn't develop explicit romantic feelings for him until this season.
Right.
Until much later, because I think if they were to do that for her as a side character, like to immediately have her have a crush on Deku, like it would have become a defining part of her character. But now that we only see it in season 3, it feels a lot more organic because her eventual crush on Deku is more a result of feelings of, it stems more from feelings of admiration instead of, I don't know, other shallow stuff. Like, she really admires Deku, and then she sees it slowly trickling into a crush.
In my notes I've written, Ochiko realizing she has a crush on Deku? No, I'm dead. Call an ambulance. But for me...
You sent me a picture of that.
Let's also maybe talk about Momo a little bit.
Yes.
Why don't you start this one off?
Sure. Okay, so Momo, I mean, I've already said I do like Momo's character. I like that she is really smart. I like the little arc that she goes through in previous season 1 maybe. Momo's costume is the most revealing of all of the girls in the show. And there's in-world justification for why she has this like open V-neck thing. It's because her quirk, she needs to create things from her lipids or something. So she needs to have that skin open for her to be able to. So I get that. And so it used to make me uncomfortable because I was like, oh, why do they have to do this for her? Why do they have to bring so much attention to her teenage body? But I do think that from what we see with the other girl characters, not all of them are treated that way. Not all of them get that kind of like, sometimes it's very obvious when the male gaze is present in a character design. So I do think that there's justification for her costume being that way. I will say though that I don't know why. I feel like there was a potential here for her character design to be not necessarily as traditionally stick skinny, because if her quirk is that she makes things from her lipids, like, shouldn't she have like, not 0% body fat?
Yes.
Shouldn't she be a little bit more stocky or just like have a little bit more meat on her bones? I don't know. I think it was just potential for them to do varying character designs, varying body types for the girl characters, because we see varying body types for the boys. Yeah. Some of them are bigger. Yeah. Some of them are taller. Yes. So I think for the girls, it's like, not all of them have to be hourglass figure or everything like that. But yeah, that's all I had to say about it.
I definitely agree with all your points about Momo. I'm really glad that she was among the 5 that went to go save Bakugo, because
yes, I love that she
think
was there.
That shows it was just a good opportunity to show her what she's all about, you know, who she really is, and that she's not just going to be confined to the outskirts, to the fringes of class 1A, you know.
I agree. I think I don't like it when the female characters don't get to be there for the climactic main story parts of a show, because it's kind of like, oh, so they're just there for what? Like, just to be in the background, just to be there for comedy relief. So it's really nice when the female characters get to be a part of the action. Momo gets to be a part of the Bakugo rescue arc, and then Su-chan and Ochiko get to be a part of next season's huge arc as well. So it's just great.
Although, you know, there's always room for improvement, you know, like
there's always room
she wasn't
for more.
Really there for the main action. She was just physically there, but she was there, so I'm happy she was there.
She played a role. They didn't need her.
Yeah. Exactly. Let's move on to the next segment. So this segment is called Dumpster Fire. So Dumpster Fire is a segment where we can just talk about whatever we want. You know, we're dead tired from talking about intellectual stuff. Let's just let loose, okay? Okay, let's talk about voice acting first.
Yes.
Voice actors.
Man.
So we already know we have our bias, Nobuhiko. Our voice acting bias.
I want to talk about Yuki Kaji.
Oh yeah,
because he's just such a great voice actor. I think that he voices Todoroki, and I love his voice. I think that he does a great performance as both Todoroki and Eren Yeager from Attack on Titan. I know he's done a lot of other vocal performances as well. And Kenma. Wait, he's Kenma? Oh, I didn't know that.
Like, I literally searched up voice comparisons of voice actor characters for him, and the way he voices Kenma is so different from how he voices Todoroki that you wouldn't even guess it was the same guy. But he voices Kenma.
Then there's also Kaito Ishikawa.
Oh my gosh, my bias. He's my biased voice actor.
Okay, can I just say that the level of conflicted feelings I have when I realized that Kaito Ishikawa, who voices Ida in this show, also voices
Kageyama Tobio
from Haikyuu. I honestly feel like Ida has like some of the best lines in this show. Like when Kota punches Deku in the balls and Ida says, "Why would you do that to Midoriya's scrotum?" I think that is the best line in this season.
When Overhaul came.
Oh my god, I should have known.
We already know that I love Overhaul's voice.
Yeah, you have like a level of simpery for that voice that is like unmatched.
Just the voice.
It's a great voice.
Because it's the drawl. It's the low. Anyways.
Let's not get into this. Moving on. I really like that Horikoshi draws his characters in alternative outfits. And what I mean by that is I love when a manga artist or a character designer draws their characters outside of their school uniform or outside of a singular outfit, because I think it adds a sense of realism to a show when, you know, the characters are not always wearing the same clothes every day. And it seems like a really minor thing. It seems like a very small thing, but I think it does a lot to just show elements of a character's personality that you might not get, because when you see their clothes every single day changing, it adds like an element to their personalities. I like that different characters wear their school uniforms a little bit differently. I know a lot of shows do that actually, but I think it's like really great in this show because it's really subtle, right? It's not just like how in some anime your four main characters are just wearing hoodies over their school uniforms. Like, it's all really subtle stuff. Like, the way that, like, Deku's tie is, like, looks a little different than other people's. Or, like, Bakugo wears, like, an orange belt with his uniform that the other characters don't. This is really embarrassing that I've noticed all these things. But
I didn't notice that.
But the characters...
In my head, I was like, oh, yeah? Does he?
Yeah.
Okay. I just like to talk about Bakugo and Kirishima being best friends.
Aw, I know. They're so cute.
I think that I am just in love with the Tsundere X Ball of Sunshine dynamic.
100%. Love it. I love it.
And the fact that Deku was like, Kirishima, it's gotta be you. Like, you have to tell Bakugo that, come with me, grab my hand.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know. I think I'm just soft for unlikely dude friendships. Like, I just love seeing cold dudes be soft for one another.
Okay. No, I completely agree.
Yeah, you know what I mean, right? Why is it that every episode I say something like super sketchy?
Usually I edit it out, but maybe we'll keep that one in.
That's us. We are the edit team. Please,
we'll keep that one. That is, like, honest, compared to the other things you've said, that one's pretty tame. How did you feel about...
Take your time.
No, I can't say it.
No, Chris, I don't feel like re-recording this one. Honestly.
Why do Bakugo's arms, period,
have to be so...
Why do his arms, period? That's it. That's all.
For the YouTube video, we're just going to show a montage. Montage time. Arm.
By extension, Todoroki's arms as well, but we don't see them as much.
We don't see them.
We see them when he's sitting in that boiling water and at the training camp, and he's practicing his fire and ice at the same time. And I was
literally
like,
don't know what scene you're talking about.
Oh. Can you talk more about why and how you came to stan Todoroki Shoto? Because I've talked about why.
I don't. Just kidding.
Oh, okay. All right. Moving on then.
I don't know. I'm just the kind of person that when you stan someone, you stan hard. So
I feel you. There's no in between. Yeah. It's like
loyalty. Okay.
It's like, oh, I don't really care for this character, and I would die for this character.
Yeah.
I agree.
It's like, oh, I don't really see this character, or I don't want to see this character.
Yeah.
Exactly.
All right.
Okay. So that wraps up our Now it's time for ratings.
Yes, ma'am.
So I believe I went first last time, so you may go first this time.
Okay, I mean, this one's not hard, you know what I mean? But drum roll. I'm kidding. I'm obviously gonna give this a 5 out of 5. Ida's glasses.
Because reusable ones.
I think it is so funny. Again, I just think Ida is such a hilarious character. When they go into Ida's room and he has an entire wall filled with shelves of his glasses just in case they break. And he's always prepared.
This guy could have used contacts, but instead he has shelves of glasses.
And I'm gonna call this a personal 5 because if you were to ask me to rate this show 2-3 years ago, maybe before I watched season 3, I would have given it maybe like a 4 or a 4.5, because I think that when you write a world as cool and diverse as this one, it feels like there are so many facets of the society that I would want to see explored even more or explored more deeply. but there's just no time to, right? So I think that there are a lot of themes of like, for example, one thing that I would like to see more of is a hero that maybe isn't a good person. And I know that we get that a little bit with Endeavor, but he's like immediately redeemed, you know? He's like, he's still shown to be a good hero, even if has like his family issues and stuff like that. I would like to see more of like that kind of theme being explored. And I do feel like there were just elements of the world building that, again, because Horikoshi made a world that is so interesting and so colorful, that I just have so many questions. Or of like, you know, what does petty crime look like? Or like, you know, I want to see more humanization of the villains and stuff like that. Because we get a little bit, but not enough, in my opinion.
Yeah.
But
yes,
I'm giving it a 5 because I have come to a point where I love these characters and I'm so invested in them. When you can create a cast that is so big and you're still able to balance these multiple character arcs and you're able to interweave them in interesting ways and interweave them into your main conflicts, and again, just create such a solid build up to everyone's emotional climax. Like, I don't know. I can't not give it a 5 because I do think that this show now does have a special place in my heart, just for personal reasons.
Agreed. I will give this show 5 out of 5 expensive night vision goggles that have to be repaid later by Bakugo.
I love that.
For me, this was a redeemed 5. I'm not one to necessarily just give out 5s if something so clearly adheres to a formula, right? Like, for me, I just don't. I appreciate it when things break the mold or when things transcend a certain mold, whatever. But for me, it was a redeemed 5 because I was very surprised by where this show ended up going. And I can honestly say that Bakugo's redemption arc in this season was one of the main reasons why I love this show so much, because I think that it's been a long time since I've watched such a good character development arc and redemption arc like this.
Yeah.
I like how much writers care about their characters and about this show and how much they know about it. I think that's really important. And I just think that it's not internationally acclaimed for no reason. You know, like, a lot of people like this show. Although I hesitate to recommend it to people as like maybe your first anime or something, because it does give off vibes of a kid's show, if that makes sense. Like, it's very optimistic and colorful, and it uses that super overused superhero trope and genre. But you know, if anyone tells you those things, take it with a grain of salt, because the storytelling is great, it's unparalleled, character development is immaculate, and animation is great too. So don't judge a series just because it's mainstream or because it's too optimistic. That brings us to the end of this podcast episode. Thank you for sticking with it. We know it wasn't easy.
We know this one wasn't easy. This episode's definitely going to be long, so if you're still here.
Yeah.
Thank you.
But we wanted to start off 2021 with a bang. With a Bakugo bang. And I think we did. So, there we go.
Yes.
So don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel at The Workshop, as well as follow us. We are on Twitter at Into The Workshop, and you can find us, our audio clips, wherever you get your podcasts: Spotify, Apple, Google. We're looking forward to speaking and seeing you guys next time.
Bye.
Bye.